The moment I heard his car pull into the driveway, my heart stopped. 3 years, 2 months, and 15 days since Lucas left, but who's counting? I remained frozen at my easel, brush suspended mid-stroke, as footsteps and voices filtered up from below. Lucas. Oh honey, we've missed you. Mom's voice bright with happiness. Hey Mom. Dad. His voice, deeper than I remembered, sent shivers down my spine. I forced myself to continue painting, trying to lose myself in the swirls of blue and gray on my canvas. The stairs creaked. Someone coming up. Please, not yet. I'm not ready. Emma. Mom called. Lucas is home. Home. Was it still his home after he'd fled to California without so much as a goodbye? After he'd ignored my calls and messages for months? After he'd left me with nothing but confusion and an ache that wouldn't go away? Coming, I called back, setting down my brush with trembling fingers. I wiped my paint-stained hands on my already stained jeans and took a deep breath. Just act normal. He's just your stepbrother. Nothing more. I descended the stairs slowly, each step feeling like a journey through molasses. And there he was, standing in our entryway, taller than I remembered, more filled out. His dark hair was longer, curling slightly at the nape of his neck. His eyes met mine and the world tilted sideways. Hey he said softly, using the nickname only he ever used. Welcome back, I managed, proud of how steady my voice sounded. I didn't move to hug him, though Mom shot me a questioning look. Dinner's almost ready, Dad announced, oblivious to the tension. Lucas, why don't you get settled in your old room? Emma, help me set the table. In the kitchen, I mechanically arranged plates and silverware while Dad chatted about Lucas's new job in tech, his apartment in San Francisco, his apparent success. I half listened, more focused on controlling my breathing and keeping my hands from shaking. You okay, sweetie? Dad asked, pausing in his monologue. You seem distracted. Just tired. Been painting all day. That new series for the gallery showing? I nodded, grateful for the change in subject. Yeah. The Shadows of Summer collection. Still need to finish 3 more pieces. The ones you won't let anyone see yet? He smiled knowingly. Your mother's dying of curiosity. If he only knew what those paintings revealed. If any of them knew. Dinner was an exercise in careful avoidance. Lucas sat across from me, and I studied my plate, as if it held the secrets of the universe. Mom and Dad carried most of the conversation, asking about California, his work, his friends there. Any special someone? Mom asked and I tensed. No, Lucas answered quickly. Too quickly. Work keeps me busy. What about you, Emma? Dad turned to me. Thomas has been asking about you. I felt Lucas's gaze snap to my face. Thomas and I are better as friends, I said firmly. Such a shame, Mom sighed. He's such a nice young man. Nice, safe, normal Thomas. Who'd looked at my paintings and seen too much. Who'd said, you're in love with someone else. Not as a question but as a fact. Who'd walked away, because he knew he could never compete with a ghost. After dinner, I escaped to my studio, but the sanctuary felt violated somehow. Lucas had always been my muse here, his absence fueling countless paintings. Now his presence downstairs made everything feel too real, too dangerous. I heard his footsteps before his knock. Can I come in? No. Yes. Please. Go away. It's your house too, I said instead. He entered slowly, eyes sweeping over the canvases that covered every surface. Most were turned to face the wall, the ones that revealed too much, but enough were visible to make me nervous. These are incredible, Em, he said, studying a seascape. You've gotten even better. 3 years is a long time to practice. He flinched at the edge in my voice. Emma, don't. I turned away, picking up my brush again. We don't need to do this. Do what? Talk? Acknowledge each other's existence. Pretend everything's normal when we both know it's not. The words escaped before I could stop them. Silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words and memories we'd both tried to bury. Finally he spoke. I'm sorry I left the way I did. Are you sorry you left, or just sorry about how you did it? He moved closer, and I could feel his presence like electricity on my skin. What do you want me to say? I turned to face him. anger and hurt and something else burning in my chest. I want you to tell me why. Why you ran away. Why you cut me off completely. Why you're back now. Emma. His voice was rough. You know why. No, I said, even though I did know. We both knew. I don't. He took another step closer, and I backed away until I hit my easel. Some things are better left unsaid. Like the real reason you left. Like what happened that night by the beach. Stop, he whispered, but his eyes never left mine. Why? Because you're afraid someone might hear? Because we might have to finally admit what we've been avoiding for years. The tension between us was unbearable, electric. For a moment I thought he might close the distance between us. Consequences be damned. Instead he turned away. Good night, Emma. I watched him leave, then turned to my hidden paintings. The ones that told our real story. The ones that showed what happens when love grows in places it shouldn't, between people who should only be family. Welcome home, Lucas. Let the torture begin. Morning light streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across my bedroom floor. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning as memories of Lucas's return played on repeat in my mind. The house felt different with him in it, charged, dangerous, like a storm about to break. I heard movement in the hallway and froze. His footsteps passed my door, paused for a moment, then continued downstairs. Only then did I let out the breath I'd been holding. This was ridiculous. We couldn't keep avoiding each other forever. In the kitchen, Mom was making pancakes while Lucas sat at the counter, reading something on his laptop. He looked up when I entered, and for a moment our eyes met. 3 years hadn't changed the way my heart raced when he looked at me. Morning, sweetie, Mom chirped. Pancakes. Just coffee, I mumbled, moving to the coffee maker. Lucas shifted in his seat, and I felt his eyes following me. You need to eat, he said quietly. You always forget when you're working on a project. The fact that he remembered this detail about me, that he still cared enough to comment, made my hands shake as I poured my coffee. Infine. Emma's got her big gallery showing coming up, Mom explained proudly. First solo exhibition. When is it? Lucas asked. 2 weeks, I answered, still not looking at him. The Shadows of Summer series. That's what you were working on last night. Finally, I turned to face him. Among other things, Mom glanced between us, sensing the tension but misinterpreting its cause. It'll be nice to have you there, Lucas. Family supporting family. Family. The word hung in the air like a judgment. I wouldn't miss it, Lucas said, his eyes never leaving mine. After breakfast, I retreated to my studio, but concentration eluded me. Every brushstroke felt wrong, every color choice questioned. I was halfway through ruining my third canvas when there was a knock at the door. Not now, Mom, I called. It's me, Lucas's voice replied. My hand tightened on the brush. Come in. He entered, closing the door behind him. The studio suddenly felt too small, too intimate. He moved to stand behind me, studying the canvas I was working on. You're painting me again, he observed. I paint what I see. Even when I'm not here? I set down my brush, turning to face him. You were always here, Lucas. In my head, in my art, in everything I created. You left physically, but you never really left. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it hurt. I thought distance would make it easier. Did it? No. His admission hung between us. Every time I saw your work online, every time Mom mentioned you, it was like leaving all over again. Why did you come back? He moved closer. Close enough that I could smell his cologne. The same one he'd worn 3 years ago. Because running away didn't work. Because I missed home. Because I missed. Don't, I whispered. Why not? We're both adults now. Things are different. Are they? I gestured around the studio. We're still step-siblings. Mom and Dad are still married. The reasons you left haven't changed. But we have, he insisted. I'm not the same person who ran away 3 years ago. No. I challenged. Then why haven't you told them why you really left? Why we barely spoke for 3 years? His jaw tightened. You know why? Say it, I demanded. For once, just say it out loud. Instead of answering, he reached out and touched one of my paintings. one showing two figures on a moonlit beach, their faces turned away but their bodies clearly gravitating toward each other. This is from that night, isn't it? He asked softly. The night you kissed me and then disappeared for 3 years? Yes. He flinched. Emma. No, you wanted to talk about it. Let's talk. Let's talk about how you kissed me that night, and then packed your bags and left for California without a word. Let's talk about how you ignored my calls and messages for months. Let's talk about how I had to pretend everything was fine while I was breaking inside. I was trying to protect you, he said roughly. To protect both of us. From what? Love? The word hung between us like a live wire. Neither of us had ever said it before, not in this context. From destroying our family, he corrected. From the scandal, the judgment, the way people would look at us. You were just starting your career. That wasn't your decision to make alone, I shot back. You didn't protect me, Lucas. You abandoned me. He moved suddenly, closing the distance between us. His hands came up to frame my face, and for a wild moment, I thought he might kiss me again. I never abandoned you, he whispered fiercely. Everything I did was for you. To give you a chance at a normal life. I didn't want normal, I breathed. I wanted you. A knock at the door made us jump apart. Mom's voice called through the wood. Emma? Thomas is here to see you. Lucas stepped back, his face closing off. You should go. Your normal life is waiting. I watched him walk away again, and wondered if some wounds were too deep to ever heal properly. The gallery was quiet as I hung my paintings, each one a piece of my heart exposed for the world to see. Thomas stood nearby, helping me measure and adjust, his presence both comforting and uncomfortable. You're still in love with him, he said suddenly, breaking the silence. I nearly dropped the painting I was holding. What? Lucas. Thomas gestured to the walls around us. He's in every single one of these. Maybe not obviously, but I can see him. In the way you paint shadows, in the longing in every brushstroke. I carefully set down the painting, buying time to steady my voice. You're seeing things that aren't there. Am I? He moved closer, his voice gentle. Emma, I've known you for 2 years. We dated for 6 months. I'm not blind and I'm not stupid. These paintings, they're love letters. They're just art. Art is never just art with you. Every piece tells a story. He touched one of the canvases, a stormy seascape with 2 figures in silhouette. This is about that night, isn't it? The night he left. I turned away, unable to meet his eyes. Thomas. It's okay, he said softly. I knew when we were dating that your heart belonged to someone else. I just didn't realize who until he came back. He's my stepbrother. Is that why you never acted on it? Or why he left? Before I could answer, the gallery door opened. Lucas stood there, backlit by the afternoon sun, and my heart did its usual somersault. Mom said I'd find you here, he said, then noticed Thomas. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. You're not, Thomas said, gathering his coat. I was just leaving. He paused beside me, speaking low enough that only I could hear. Stop punishing yourself for loving him, Emma. Life's too short for that kind of pain. After Thomas left, Lucas moved through the gallery, studying each painting with intense focus. I watched him, wondering if he could see what Thomas saw, if he recognized himself in every piece. These are incredible, he said finally. But they're also dangerous. What do you mean? Anyone who knows us, who really looks at these. He trailed off, gesturing to a particular painting. One showing 2 people dancing in shadows, their forms intertwined. They'll see the truth. Maybe I'm tired of hiding the truth, I challenged. Maybe I'm tired of pretending that what happened between us was nothing. He turned to face me, his expression pained. It wasn't nothing. It was everything. That's why I had to leave. You keep saying that, but it doesn't make sense. Running away didn't change how we felt. It just made us both miserable. I was trying to do the right thing. For who? I demanded. For Mom and Dad? For society? What about what was right for us? He ran his hands through his hair in frustration. Do you have any idea how hard it was to leave? To ignore your messages? To try to build a life without you in it? Actually, yes, I do know how hard it is. 'Cause I had to live it too. Except I didn't choose it. You did that for both of us. Emma. He moved closer, and I backed away until I hit the wall. No, I said firmly. You don't get to do this. You don't get to come back after 3 years and act like you were protecting me. You were protecting yourself. That's not true. Isn't it? You were scared. Scared of what people would think, scared of how we felt, scared of what it meant. So you ran. Of course I was scared, he exploded. I was in love with my stepsister. Do you know what that did to me? Watching you every day, living in the same house, pretending I didn't feel what I felt. The admission hung in the air between us, the first time either of us had said it out loud. And now, I whispered, are you still scared? He closed the distance between us, his hand coming up to cup my cheek. Terrified, but I'm more scared of losing you again. Then don't, I breathed. Stay. Fight for this for us. It won't be easy. People will talk. Let them talk. I'm tired of living half a life because we're afraid of what other people think. His thumb traced my cheekbone and I leaned into his touch. What about Mom and Dad? They deserve the truth. We're not kids anymore, Lucas. We can't help how we feel, but we can choose to be honest about it. Your career. My career is fine. These paintings? They're about us, about love that doesn't fit into neat boxes. If people can't handle that, it's their problem. He leaned his forehead against mine, his breath mingling with mine. I've missed you so much, Em. Every day, every minute. Then stop running, I whispered. Stay with me this time. The gallery door opened again and we jumped apart. Mom stood there, looking between us with an unreadable expression. I brought lunch, she said slowly. But I think maybe we need to have a different kind of conversation first. Lucas and I exchanged glances. The moment of truth had arrived sooner than we'd expected. Yes, I said firmly, reaching for Lucas's hand. I think we do. Mom sat at the gallery's small office table, her hands wrapped around an untouched cup of coffee. The silence stretched between us like a rubber band about to snap. How long? She finally asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Lucas and I exchanged glances before I answered. We realized our feelings 3 years ago, the summer before Lucas left. And before that? Nothing happened before that, Lucas assured her quickly. We fought it for a long time, Mom. We tried to ignore it. She nodded slowly, processing. The night you left. Was that because of this? Yes, he admitted. I kissed Emma on the beach that night. And then I panicked. I thought leaving was the right thing to do. But it wasn't, I added softly. It just hurt everyone more. Mom's eyes moved to the paintings surrounding us, seeing them with new understanding. These are all about him, aren't they? About you too. I nodded, unable to speak. I should have seen it, she murmured. The way you stopped painting after he left. The sadness in your work. The way you withdrew from everyone. We never meant to hurt anyone, Lucas said. That's why I left. I thought distance would make these feelings go away. Did it? No, we both said simultaneously. Mom's lips twitched slightly despite everything. Have you told your father? Not yet, I answered. We wanted to tell you first. She took a deep breath. This won't be easy, you know. People will talk. They might not understand. We know, Lucas said, reaching for my hand. But we're tired of pretending. Tired of hiding. You're both adults, Mom continued. I can't tell you what to do with your lives. But are you sure? Really sure this is what you want? I've never been more sure of anything, I said firmly. Mom, I know this isn't conventional. I know it might be hard for you and Dad to accept. But what Lucas and I feel. It's real. It's not going away. 3 years apart proved that, Lucas added. Mom was quiet for a long moment, studying us. I suppose, she said finally, that love doesn't always follow the rules we set for it. Hope loomed in my chest. Does that mean? It means I love you both, she said carefully. And while this will take some getting used to, I want you to be happy. Your father. Well, that might be a different conversation. We'll talk to him together, Lucas suggested. All of us. Mom nodded, then stood up. I need some time to process this. And you two need to figure out how you want to handle this going forward. The gallery opening is in 2 weeks. People will ask questions about these paintings. Let them ask, I said. I'm done hiding. After Mom left, Lucas and I stood in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling around us. That went better than expected, he said finally. She's always been more understanding than Dad will be. We'll face that together, he promised, pulling me close. No more running away. I leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent. Promise? Promise. The gallery door opened again, and this time it was Thomas. He took in our embrace and smiled sadly. I forgot my phone, he explained, moving to retrieve it from the office. But I'm glad to see you finally figured things out. Thomas, I started, but he waved me off. Be happy, Emma. That's all I ever wanted for you. He paused at the door. And Lucas? Don't mess this up again. As the door closed behind him, thunder rumbled outside. The storm that had been threatening all day was finally breaking. We should get these paintings covered, Lucas said, looking at the windows. We worked together, carefully protecting each piece. When we reached the beach painting, the one of that fateful night, we both paused. I painted this one so many times, I admitted, trying to capture exactly how it felt, that moment before everything changed. And after? I couldn't paint for months after you left. When I finally could, well, you see the results. He turned me to face him. I'm so sorry, Em. I thought I was being noble, sacrificing my happiness for yours. I never realized I was taking away your choice in the matter. We can't change the past, I said, touching his face. But we can choose our future. The rain started then, a sudden downpour that drummed against the gallery's roof. Lightning flashed, illuminating us in brief, bright bursts. Remember that night? Lucas asked softly. The storm was just like this. I remember everything about that night. He leaned down, his lips hovering just above mine. This time I'm not running away. When he kissed me, it was like coming home, like finding a piece of myself I'd lost 3 years ago. The storm raged outside, but inside the gallery, surrounded by paintings that told our story, we were finally where we belonged. I love you, I whispered against his lips. I never stopped. I love you too, he breathed. Always have, always will. The gallery lights flickered as another lightning bolt split the sky. We had more challenges ahead, telling Dad, facing public opinion, navigating our unconventional relationship. But standing there in Lucas's arms, I knew we could handle anything as long as we faced it together. The storm outside began to ease, but the one in our hearts had finally calmed. Sometimes the most beautiful things come from weathering the storm, from facing the lightning and refusing to run. Our love might not fit into society's neat boxes, but it was ours, and we were done apologizing for it. As the rain gentled into a soft patter, we began planning our future. One painting, one moment, one truth at a time. The night of the gallery opening arrived with a mix of anticipation and dread. I stood before the mirror in my studio, adjusting my black cocktail dress, while Lucas paced behind me. Dad called again, he said, checking his phone. He wants to know why we insisted on having this conversation after the opening rather than before. Because I need to get through this night first, I replied, turning to face him. One life-changing event at a time. He stopped pacing to pull me close. You look beautiful. You're biased. Proudly so. The gallery was already filling with people when we arrived. Art critics, local collectors, fellow artists. All milling around, studying my work with varying degrees of interest. Mom was there, playing hostess with practiced ease, though I noticed she kept glancing our way with concern. Miss Carter. A critic from the local paper approached, notebook in hand. These pieces are remarkably intimate. There's a recurring theme of forbidden love throughout the collection. Can you tell us what inspired this series? I felt Lucas tense beside me. Taking a deep breath, I answered. The series explores the complexity of love, how it doesn't always follow societal expectations or rules. It's about choosing authenticity over conformity. And the two figures that appear in many pieces? They seem to be the same couple, always in shadow, always reaching for each other. They represent a journey, I said carefully. From denial to acceptance, from hiding to embracing truth. The critic nodded, scribbling in his notebook. There's an almost painful honesty in these works. Very powerful. As he moved away, Lucas squeezed my hand. You okay? Getting there. The evening progressed in a blur of conversations and congratulations. I sold several pieces, including the beach storm painting, though part of me had wanted to keep that one. Around 9, I noticed Dad had arrived, standing near the entrance with an unreadable expression as he studied the artwork. He knows, Lucas whispered. Look at how he's looking at the paintings. Should we talk to him now? Before Lucas could answer, Thomas appeared with champagne flutes. Thought you both might need these. Your father's been asking questions about the painting's subjects. What did you tell him? I asked, accepting the glass. Nothing. Not my story to tell. He glanced between us. But you might want to do it soon. He's starting to put things together. As if on cue, Dad began walking toward us. Mom intercepted him, leading him to the office. But his eyes never left Lucas and me. Now or never, Lucas murmured. We found them in the office, Dad sitting rigidly while Mom stood by the window. I think, Dad said slowly, that we need to discuss these paintings. I closed the door behind us. Yes, we do. How long has this been going on? Robert, Mom started, but he held up a hand. I want to hear it from them. Lucas stepped forward. Dad, we need you to listen without judgment first. Can you do that? Dad's jaw tightened, but he nodded. For the next hour, we told him everything. How our feelings had developed gradually, how we'd fought against them, how Lucas's departure had been an attempt to do the right thing. We explained about the paintings, about our decision to stop hiding, about our hope for understanding if not acceptance. When we finished, Dad was silent for a long time. Finally he spoke. Do you know what you're asking of me? Of this family? We're not asking for anything, I said firmly. We're telling you how things are. We love each other, Dad. That's not going to change. You're step-siblings. By marriage. Not blood, Lucas pointed out. We didn't grow up together. We met as teenagers. That doesn't make this right. What makes it right, Mom interjected, is that they're both adults who care deeply for each other, who have tried to deny their feelings and only hurt themselves in the process. Dad turned to her in surprise. You knew about this? I found out recently, and while it took some adjustment, I've seen how happy they make each other. Happy? Dad stood up, agitated. What about when people find out? When they talk? Have you thought about what this could do to Emma's career? To Lucas's? We've thought about everything, I said. We've had 3 years to think about it. And we've decided that being true to ourselves matters more than what others might say. These paintings. Dad gestured to the gallery beyond. They're about you two. Yes, Lucas answered. Emma painted our story. Dad sank back into his chair, looking suddenly tired. I need time to process this. We understand, I said softly. But we're not asking for permission, Dad. We're asking for understanding. And if I can't give that, then that's your choice, Lucas replied. But it won't change how we feel or what we plan to do. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Dad stood. I'm going home, he announced. I need to think. After he left, Mom hugged us both. Give him time, she advised. He'll come around eventually. The gallery was nearly empty when we returned, just a few stragglers admiring the final pieces. Thomas was helping the staff begin cleanup. How did it go? He asked, seeing our expressions. About as well as expected, I sighed. He'll either accept it or he won't, Lucas said, pulling me close. But we're done hiding. As if to prove his point, he kissed me softly, right there in the gallery. Someone gasped. Probably Mrs. Henderson from the Art Society. But I couldn't bring myself to care. Well, Thomas chuckled. That's one way to announce it. The next morning, my phone was flooded with messages and missed calls. The local art scene was buzzing with gossip about the step-siblings who fell in love, and the paintings that told their story. But as I lay in bed, watching Lucas sleep beside me, I realized something profound. The truth, once spoken, loses its power to terrify. We were free now, free to love openly, free to face whatever came next together. Outside, the sun was rising, painting the sky in the same colors I'd used to capture our love story. Sometimes the most beautiful art comes from the deepest truths, even when those truths aren't easy to tell. I reached for my sketchbook, beginning to draw the first piece of our new chapter. This time the figures weren't in shadow. They were in full light, facing the world together unafraid. 6 months after the gallery opening, life had settled into a new rhythm. The initial scandal had died down, replaced by a surprising wave of support from unexpected quarters. My paintings had attracted international attention, with galleries in New York and Paris expressing interest in showing the collection. I was in my studio working on a new series when Lucas brought in the mail. "Another letter from Dad," he said, setting it on my workbench. I wiped paint from my hands. "What does this one say?" We'd received several letters over the months, each one showing gradual progress from anger to understanding. The last one had actually included a family photo from before everything changed, a peace offering of sorts. "Haven't opened it yet. Wanted to read it together." I nodded, and we sat on the paint-splattered couch that had become our favorite reading spot. The letter was longer than usual. "Dear Emma and Lucas, your mother and I visited the gallery yesterday. She wanted to show me the new pieces, the ones you painted after the opening, Emma. I spent a long time looking at them, really looking this time, without the shock and anger that clouded my first viewing. I see it now, what I missed before. These aren't just paintings about love, they're about courage, about choosing truth over comfort, authenticity over conformity." The new series, with the figures finally stepping into the light, it moved me in ways I wasn't prepared for. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past months. About family, about love, about what really matters in the end. I remember when your mother and I first fell in love, how some people thought it was too soon after my divorce. How they whispered about us, but we knew what we felt was real. Perhaps that's why your mother understood sooner than I did. She remembers what it's like to love someone despite what others might think. I can't pretend this has been easy for me to accept, but I'm trying. Because what I see in your paintings, Emma, and what I see when you're together, is something rare and genuine, something worth fighting for. Would you both come to dinner this Sunday? Your mother is cooking, and she promises not to let me make any inappropriate jokes, though I can't guarantee I won't try. Love, Dad. I wiped tears from my eyes as Lucas folded the letter. Did that really just happen? Seems like it did. He pulled me close, kissing my temple. Ready to face Dad's terrible jokes. As long as you're there with me. The studio was filled with afternoon light, making the wet paint on my newest canvas gleam. It showed 2 figures, us standing in a doorway, silhouetted against a warm, welcoming glow. Behind us were shadows, but ahead was nothing but light. "What are you calling this one?" Lucas asked, studying the painting. "Coming home." He smiled, understanding the multiple meanings. "Perfect." That Sunday, we stood on Dad and Mom's doorstep, hands clasped tightly. The door opened before we could knock, revealing Dad in an absurd kiss the cook apron. "Mom said you weren't allowed in the kitchen," I reminded him, trying to break the tension. "I'm supervising," he defended, then awkwardly pulled us both into a hug. "Come in. We've got a lot to catch up on." Inside, Mom was rescuing something from the oven while soft jazz played in the background. The scene was so normal, so familiar, it made my heart ache. "I saw the article in Art Forum," Dad said as we settled in the living room. "They're calling you the voice of a new generation. Said your work challenges conventional narratives about love and family. Is that okay with you?" I asked carefully. He was quiet for a moment. "You know, when I first saw those paintings, all I could see was what other people would think. Now I see the beauty in them, the truth." "Robert," Mom called from the kitchen, "come help me with these plates. Let them have a moment." Once we were alone, Lucas pulled me close. "You okay?" "Better than okay," I whispered. "I never thought we'd get here. Speaking of getting places." He shifted nervously. "I've been thinking. Dangerous habit. Funny, but seriously." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. I know this might seem fast to everyone else, but for us. Lucas. He opened the box, revealing a delicate ring with an opal center, my favorite stone. We've waited 3 years, Emma. I don't want to wait anymore. Marry me. Through tears, I managed to nod. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, we heard a small commotion from the kitchen doorway. Mom and Dad stood there, plates forgotten in their hands. Did he just? Mom started. He did. I confirmed, showing them the ring. Dad set down his plates carefully. Well, he said, his voice gruff with emotion, I suppose we better open that champagne I've been saving. Later that night, as we all sat around the dinner table sharing stories and plans, I realized something profound. Family isn't just about blood or legal documents. It's about love, acceptance, and the courage to fight for both. The next morning, I started a new painting. This one showed a family dinner scene, all the figures fully illuminated, their faces clear and smiling. In the foreground, 2 hands clasped together, a small opal ring catching the light. Sometimes the hardest roads lead to the most beautiful destinations. Our story wasn't conventional, but it was ours. And now it was complete with the blessing we'd thought impossible. As I painted, Lucas worked on his laptop nearby, researching wedding venues. The future stretched before us, bright and full of possibilities, and for the first time in years, everything felt exactly as it should be. The shadows were finally behind us, and we were stepping into the light together, supported by the family that had learned to love us as we are. And really, isn't that what coming home is all about? The wedding planning brought its own unique challenges. How do you explain to vendors that yes, we share the same parents' address, but no, we're not actually related? Eventually, we settled on a destination wedding in Santorini, Greece-neutral territory where we could write our own story from scratch. The symbolism is a bit on the nose, don't you think? Thomas teased as he helped me pack my studio for the move. The white buildings, the blue sea, the fresh start. Sometimes obvious symbolism is the best kind, I replied, carefully wrapping my latest painting. A wedding gift for Lucas that he hadn't seen yet. The past year had been a whirlwind of changes. My art career had exploded after the gallery show, with exhibitions scheduled in major cities worldwide. Lucas had started his own architectural firm, specializing in sustainable design. We'd bought a house together, a Victorian fixer-upper with perfect light for a studio and enough space for his drafting tables. Have you thought about what you're going to say in your vows? Thomas asked, sealing another box. Every day. And then I changed my mind again. Just paint them, he suggested. It's how you say everything else important. The idea stuck with me. That night, after Lucas had fallen asleep, I snuck down to my studio and started a new canvas. By morning, I had the beginning of something special. Our vows translated into color and light. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparations and last-minute details. Mom threw herself into helping, perhaps making up for the initial rocky start to our relationship. Dad, in his own way, tried to, though his idea of helping was mainly staying out of the way and writing increasingly large checks. You don't have to do this, I told him after he insisted on upgrading everyone's flights to first class. Let me, he said simply. Considerate interest on all the father-daughter moments I almost missed out on by being stubborn. The night before we left for Greece, we had a family dinner at home. Looking around the table, at Mom and Dad, at Thomas and his new boyfriend, at Lucas's sister Sarah who had flown in from London, I felt overwhelmed by how far we'd come. Remember when we thought this would never be possible? Lucas whispered, squeezing my hand under the table. Which part? The family dinner or the wedding? All of it. The ceremony site in Santorini was everything we'd hoped for. A private villa perched on the caldera, with views that made my painter's heart ache. We'd kept the guest list small, just family and close friends who had supported us from the beginning. The morning of the wedding, I woke before dawn and slipped out to the terrace with my sketchbook. The sky was just beginning to lighten, painting the white buildings in shades of rose and gold. I started sketching, trying to capture the peace of the moment. Couldn't sleep. Mom joined me, wrapping a shawl around my shoulders. Too excited. I showed her the sketch. I might need to come back here to paint properly someday. You will. She sat beside me. You know, When you first told me about you and Lucas, I was scared. Not because I didn't believe in your love, but because I was afraid the world would hurt you. And now? Now I see that your love made the world adjust to you, not the other way around. She smiled. Your father wanted me to tell you he's sorry he got emotional during the rehearsal dinner. Dad? Emotional? Never. I laughed, remembering how he'd teared up during his toast. The ceremony itself was intimate and personal. We'd written our own vows, but I had a surprise for Lucas. When it was my turn to speak, I nodded to Thomas, who unveiled the painting I'd been working on in secret. Lucas, I began. Words have never been my strongest medium, so I painted my vows instead. The painting showed our journey, from the first tentative moments on the beach to our separate paths across the world, finally converging in a burst of light and color. The edges were done in gold leaf that caught the setting sun, making the whole piece seem to glow. This is us, I continued, my voice steady despite the tears in my eyes. Every moment, every struggle, every joy. And this. I pointed to the center of the painting, where two figures merged into one amid a shower of stars. This is my promise to you, that no matter what comes, no matter what changes, my love for you will only grow stronger, brighter, more complete. Lucas, who usually maintained perfect composure, was openly crying now. When it was his turn, he pulled out not a piece of paper, but a set of architectural drawings. I designed us a home, he said simply. Not the one we're living in now, but the one we'll build together. Look at the details. The plans showed a house that combined both our passions. Walls of windows for natural light, a studio space that flowed into the living areas. Sustainable materials throughout, but it was the small details that made me gasp. The constellations from our beach nights embedded in the ceiling design, the wave patterns in the tiles, the garden plan to grow all the flowers I love to paint. This is my vow to you, he said, to build a life that honors both who we are and who we're becoming, to create spaces where our love can grow and flourish, to make every day a blank canvas for us to fill together. There wasn't a dry eye among our guests as we exchanged rings. Dad, who was performing the ceremony, having gotten ordained online specifically for this purpose, had to clear his throat several times before declaring us married. The reception was a blend of Greek and American traditions, with local musicians playing alongside our carefully curated playlist. Dad surprised everyone by learning traditional Greek dances, though Mom had to keep reminding him of the steps. As the night wore on, Lucas and I slipped away to the terrace. The moon was full, turning the white buildings silver and the sea to black velvet. Mrs. Mitchell Carter, he murmured, pulling me close. Mr. Mitchell Carter, I replied, still getting used to our new hyphenated surname. Ready for our next masterpiece? I looked up at him, understanding he meant more than just art or architecture, as long as we create it together. The next morning I woke early again, this time to find Lucas already on the terrace with coffee and his sketchbook. What are you working on? I asked, wrapping my arms around him from behind. He showed me the sketch, a design for the studio in our future home, with details I hadn't noticed in the plans yesterday. He'd incorporated elements from all my paintings of us, turning our story into architectural features. It's perfect, I whispered. Not yet, he said, adding a final touch, two figures standing at the window, watching a sunrise together. Later that day, as we prepared to leave for our honeymoon in the Greek islands, Dad pulled us aside. I have something for you, he said, handing us an envelope. Inside was a deed to a piece of land, perfect for the house in Lucas's designs. Dad, I started, but he shook his head. Let me do this. Consider it my way of saying I believe in the home you're building, both literally and figuratively. As our ferry pulled away from Santorini, I watched the white buildings recede into the distance. Lucas stood behind me, his arms around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. What are you thinking? He asked. About how endings are really beginnings in disguise. He smiled against my neck. Speaking of beginnings, have you thought about what you'll paint next? I turned in his arms, studying his face. The face I'd drawn and painted countless times, the face I knew better than my own. I think, I said slowly, it's time for a new series, not about forbidden love or hidden feelings, but about love that stands in the light. About family that grows stronger through challenges. About building something beautiful from unexpected foundations. I like that, he murmured. What will you call it? I looked past him to where the sun was setting, turning the sky into a canvas of gold and purple. I think I'll call it Legacy of Light. The title felt right, encompassing not just our story, but the larger story of love's power to transform, to heal, to create new possibilities. We'd taken an unconventional path, but it had led us exactly where we needed to be. As the ferry carried us toward our next adventure, I opened my sketchbook and began to draw. This time the figures weren't reaching or hiding or struggling. They were building something together. Their combined shadows creating not darkness, but a new kind of light. After all, isn't that what love does? It takes our individual lights and combines them into something brighter, stronger, more enduring than we could create alone. And so our story continues, not in shadows but in full glorious color. A masterpiece still in progress, painted one day at a time. 5 years after our wedding in Santorini, I stood in the studio of our newly completed home, surrounded by the Legacy of Light series that had taken the art world by storm. The house Lucas designed had become everything we dreamed of and more. A perfect blend of art and architecture, just like us. The morning light streamed through the carefully positioned windows, creating patterns on the floor that matched the constellations we'd watched on that beach so many years ago. On my easel sat my latest work in progress, a family portrait unlike any other. "They're here," Lucas called from downstairs. I wiped my hands on my apron and headed down to greet our guests. Mom and Dad arrived first, followed by Thomas and his now husband James. Today was special. We were finally revealing the completed house to the family, but more importantly, we had news to share. "The house is magnificent," Mom gushed, turning slowly to take in every detail. "Lucas, you've outdone yourself." "We both did," he said, pulling me close. Every design decision was a collaboration. Dad walked to the living room window, staring out at the garden I'd designed based on my favorite flowers to paint. "You've created something extraordinary here." "Actually," I said, exchanging a glance with Lucas, "we're creating something even more extraordinary." I rested a hand on my stomach, still flat but holding our miracle. "We're having a baby." The room erupted in joy. Mom burst into tears. Dad hugged us both at once, and Thomas immediately started planning the nursery's color scheme. "How far along?" Mom asked, wiping her eyes. 3 months, I replied. We wanted to be sure everything was okay before we told everyone. "Have you thought about names?" Thomas asked. Lucas smiled. "We're thinking Aurora, if it's a girl. After the light that brings each new day. And Vincent for a boy," I added, after another artist who saw the world differently. Later that evening, after everyone had left, Lucas found me in the studio, working on the family portrait again. Now I could add the small figure I'd been waiting to include our future child, painted in soft, promising colors. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Complete," I answered. "You know, when we first realized we loved each other, I thought our story would always be marked by struggle. I never imagined we'd get here. Accepted, happy, expecting a baby." "Speaking of the baby," he said, "I've been working on the nursery designs." He pulled out his tablet, showing me renderings of a room where the walls seemed to tell stories through subtle patterns and colors. "It's perfect," I whispered, noting how he'd incorporated elements from my paintings throughout the years. That night, we sat on our terrace under the same stars that had witnessed our first confession of love. The garden below was in full bloom, and in the distance, we could see the lights of the city where our story began. "I want to show you something," I said, leading him back to my studio. I unveiled a canvas I'd been keeping covered, my last piece for the Legacy of Light series. The painting showed 2 figures standing in a doorway, looking out at a landscape filled with light. Behind them, their shadows didn't darken the ground, but transformed into gardens of color. Between them, a small golden light hovered, our future child. And in the background, barely visible but present, were the silhouettes of our family, supporting and surrounding us with love. "This is us," I said softly. "Not just our past or present, but our future too." Every struggle led us here, to this moment, to this light. Lucas studied the painting, his eyes bright with tears. "It's beautiful," he said. "Just like our story. Our story isn't over." I reminded him, taking his hand and placing it on my stomach. "It's just beginning a new chapter." He kissed me then, soft and sweet, and I thought about all the kisses that had led to this one. From that first tentative kiss on the beach to our wedding kiss in Santorini, each one a brushstroke in the masterpiece of our love. As we stood there in the studio, surrounded by the art that told our story, I realized that what we'd created was more than just a collection of paintings or a beautiful house. We'd created a testament to love's power to transform, to heal, to build something new and beautiful from unexpected beginnings. Our child would grow up knowing that love doesn't follow rules or expectations. It follows the heart. They would learn that family is more than blood, that courage comes in many forms, and that the most beautiful art comes from living truthfully. Looking out at the night sky through our studio windows, I saw a shooting star streak across the darkness. I smiled, remembering all those nights on the beach when we'd wished on stars like that, hoping for acceptance, for understanding, for a future together. Now here we were, all our wishes granted and more, ready to start our next great adventure. "What are you thinking?" Lucas asked, his arms around me, his chin resting on my shoulder. Just like that day on the ferry leaving Santorini. "I'm thinking that love is the greatest art of all," I replied. "And we've created a masterpiece." He turned me to face him, his eyes full of the same love I'd seen that first night when everything changed. "No," he said softly, "we are the masterpiece." And in that moment, surrounded by our art, our love, and the promise of our future, I knew he was right. We were living proof that love, in its purest form, creates its own light, bright enough to overcome any darkness, strong enough to build any dream, and beautiful enough to last forever.